So today, we are going to spend a little time closing out this event. And before we do, I just want to say, as sort of a little caveat before I get started, that I am not an industry insider. So I'm not up here today to try to tell you more about your industry than you already know. You are the experts, not me. I am the outsider. I come in with that outside perspective on the macro environment, on technological trends, sociocultural trends, and our job is to put the pieces together so that we can work with pretty much every sector imaginable in plotting where the next 3, 5, 10 years are going. So that's what we're going to do as a crash course in about 30 minutes today. First thing I want to do is a little icebreaker. So for the handful of you in this room that have been with me before, I apologize about the 2 or 3 things you're going to hear right at the very beginning and at the very end of my presentation that you might have heard before. And if you've done this icebreaker with me, please don't spoil it for those around you, but I do this for a reason. So I want everyone in this room right now to think of a number between 1 and 10. Don't yell it out, just do this in your mind. I know we're late in the day and late in the event, and I'm standing between you all and drinking, so please just stay with me and let's get this exercise done. A number between 1 and 10. Take that number and multiply it by 9. Okay? If I've lost you already, we are in big trouble today. Now, if that number is 1 digit, leave it alone. If it's 2 digits, add those 2 digits together. Okay? Now take that number in your mind and subtract 5. All right, everyone has a number, hopefully. Good. Now find the corresponding letter of the alphabet to that number. 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, etc. Okay? Everyone has a letter. Think of the first country that pops into your head that begins with that letter. Got it? All right? And finally, take the second letter of that country and think of the first animal that pops into your head that starts with that letter. Did I lose anybody? All right. How many of you were thinking of this? I always like the 2 or 3 people in the room who are especially vocal. I heard someone over here. That was great. So I always open with this icebreaker, which is why a couple of you in the room who've seen me before might have seen this, and I appreciate you playing along with me. I do this because it's fun. It's a fun way to get started, and it is also a great way to, kind of in a fun way, describe what it is that we do. So you understand, as I'm up here today, as a futurist, there's no magic to understanding the future. There is no crystal ball. Basically, it is a mix of art and science, and what it really boils down to is pattern recognition. There are dozens of ways that all of you in this room could have gone through this exercise and come up with a, quote, correct answer. Dozens. But in most rooms I'm in, whether there are 10 people or whether there are 500 people, on average, about 70 to 80% at a bare minimum of people say the gray elephant from Denmark. So that's kind of where we are. When we study the future, there are dozens, if not hundreds, of trends we're tracking at any particular time. But if we know where the signal is and where the noise is, and we study patterns very carefully, we can usually have a pretty good approximation of where the future is going, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So historically, the future always went off in a lot of different directions. People who engage in scenario planning know this. They engage in a best-case scenario, a worst-case scenario, and sort of the mid-case or expected scenario. The future today looks like this. There are hundreds of different directions, in theory, that we could be going in, as far as individually, as far as whatever business we're involved in, as far as our sector, and as far as the world. It is as impossible as ever to, quote, predict the future, but we can try our best to project. There's a lot of complexity in the world today. You know about all of these things. We are coming off of a global pandemic which shook everything up to its core within the last 4 years. A lot of geopolitical uncertainty, economic turbulence, accelerating changes in areas like technology, trade, and finance. Companies are rapidly adapting to remote work, and companies are rapidly adapting to AI. The world is moving faster than ever. It's like we're in a blender. It's very difficult for us to get our bearings when everything is moving at a pace around us where it seems like a blur at all times. But it's not only moving quickly, it's also boundaryless, meaning that the distinctions between the real and the virtual and other things are not as clear. They're not as clearly delineated as they used to be. So that also adds to the complexity of today. In fact, I would say that the boundaries between the following things are all much harder to define today than if we had this conversation, let's say, 10 years ago. The physical and the virtual, the analog and the digital, the human and the artificial, and we are going to talk a lot about that today. what's real and what is fake, what is true and what is false. These boundaries are increasingly blurring. Today's operating system, and as Dan mentioned, I'm going to share a handful of terms you've never heard before because we invented them. We invent terms because we like to do it, and it's fun, but also because there are things happening that are fundamental that we don't think current language is doing a good job of encapsulating, so we come up with a term for it. This is one of the few that we've been talking about for years, and it is today's operating system. It is templosion. It is the implosion of huge things happening in smaller and smaller chunks of time. So, for example, unicorns, particularly in the technology space, but cross-sector, that often have very few employees and no clearly articulated monetization strategy, getting valuations of well over $1 billion from venture capitalists and other investors. At the same time, huge market-leading companies that once seemed invincible are going by the wayside more quickly than ever before. R&D cycles are shrinking. Strategic planning cycles are shrinking. And we see executive tenure down across the board. So this is templosion in action. Now, we talk about what we call the accelerator. We called it the COVID accelerator in 2020, but it still applies today. And the circumstances of the last 4 years accelerated trends that we were in rooms like this talking about 5, 10, 15 years ago, but people at that point weren't sure they had to pay attention as much because they thought or it sounded like something that might happen. Maybe I should know about this. And then turn back the clock 4 years ago, and all of a sudden, these things all accelerated. Now everyone is talking about these things. Everyone has to know about them. Distributed firms and remote work. Many of you in this room work from home part of the time or all of the time. You work for companies where employees are distributed all over the place, much more so than we saw even a few years ago. We were talking about this for the last 15 years. Low-skilled and low-wage jobs being displaced by technology. This has been happening for decades in other industries, but now we see it across the board. A spotlight on outmoded supply chains, and explosive growth in areas like artificial intelligence, decentralized finance, and other areas of technology and society. So this is how we feel. This is the world today. And I'm here to deliver a very important but simple message to you, which is that it is very easy for us to get caught up in all of this, the undertow of all of this, and feel overwhelmed, possibly be pessimistic, certainly be concerned. And the fact of the matter is that is all rational. Part of me feels that way. But there's also a part of me that is an eternal optimist. And I feel like the crazy circumstances that we are going through today and that we're going to continue going through in the near future are breeding ground for tremendous opportunity for all of you in this room. And so one of the takeaways from today is I want to leave you with a message of optimism on a variety of levels. This is a quote that's circulated out there. Many of you have probably heard it, but it's the idea that a diamond is a chunk of coal that did well under pressure. The last 4 years have certainly been a pressurized environment. And there are a lot of people and businesses that have emerged from this as diamonds, and others have been lumps of coal. And this is the differentiation point. How do we respond in circumstances like this that are more challenging and complex than ever? I'm going to leave you with 3 imperatives today. The last 2 I'm going to close with. The first one is stolen from science. And as a nerd, I like to steal concepts from science. Now, I'm not a scientist, but I do know what escape velocity is. It is the idea that we travel so quickly that we can escape the gravitational pull of a much larger object. And I will tell you, and we might have time for Q&A after this, the question I hate the most that I still get from a lot of people, including a couple of people in the recent past who are CEOs of different businesses, was, when's the world going to go back to normal? When are things going to go back to the way they were? That is a way to completely and immediately end a conversation with me. Because if you ask me that question, not only are you not going to like the answer, but it also shows a fundamental lack of understanding about really the way the world operates. So when we talk about escape velocity, that huge object with the large gravitational pull is the old way of doing things, the old business environment. And when I say old, it might only be 3, 4, 5 years old, but we can't think like that anymore. Believe it or not, I do most of my work not in rooms of technology founders, but I do my work in rooms of people who have been in industries in many cases that have not been disrupted that much in decades. And they're ripe for disruption. Accounting, insurance, legal, certain elements of finance. Industries that in many ways have been stable for a long time, but they are ripe for disruption. That is the message I always try to convey. I want to spend a few minutes on what I call cultural change forces, okay? Now I'm going to ask all of you a question. This is a question I've been asking for years, but the answer that I put forth now is a little bit different than it used to be. If we define a luxury in basic economic terms as something which is in extremely high demand, but extremely short supply, What's the number one luxury in all of your lives today, both personally and professionally? What do you want more of, but you do not have enough of? Beautiful. It's always nice when everyone kind of says it in sync like that. We've been asking this question for a long time, and time has always been the answer, at least in our minds, and it's always been the answer that we've heard from rooms. But I would argue that today there are three value propositions, three luxury value propositions that people and businesses will pay more for because they're at a premium and they need more of them. We call them the 3 T's, and they are now time, truth, and trust. 3 things that we do not have enough of, societally and individually, that we will pay a premium to access more of. So let's start with time. Time is the one, as I mentioned, that's kind of been a constant for a long time. And when we think about human talent and time, let's also remember that a few minutes ago I talked about the operating system of today being characterized by templosion. So time is accelerating and templosion is the operating system. The main value proposition in the future for human talent is going to be optimizing the customer or client's time. There is nothing more valuable, nor has there been in the recent past. We also have to optimize time for our internal talent if you're running a business, as a means to increasing productivity and efficiency. And this is the difference between measuring for input, how long someone works or how hard they work, and output, which is how efficiently and effectively they work. We are in a world characterized by time hacks. We know this. Everywhere you go, you hear about ways to hack your day, become more efficient at what you do. And Weightonomics is a word we kind of coined years ago, which discusses the fact that attention is increasingly the currency in an impatient world. So there is money to be made in the time that people or customers are spent waiting on what it is that you have to deliver them. So how do we think about that value proposition differently? Now remember, the second of the 3 T's is truth. We are in a world increasingly characterized by what I will call truth illusions, where we think we see something that's true, but it may or may not be. And in many cases, there is no way to validate or verify that. A world characterized by deepfakes and MDM, which stands for mis, dis, and malinformation. And again, taken at face value, this is very concerning and very complex, but it does lead to tremendous opportunities. There are 2 key competencies that human talent have to have in the future. These are not the easiest to acquire, but they're going to be increasingly essential. Critical thinking ability and media and information literacy. And the question becomes, are we in a post-truth world? What do I mean by that? Many of you in this room have probably been in conversations with people you know where the 2 of you have exactly polar opposite takes on the same information that you're consuming, and you both feel as if you have your version of the truth. It is entirely possible, and it's going to continue to increase, that there are going to be multiple versions of the truth out there, and that's something that would have been inconceivable, let's say 5 or 10 years ago, but today, many people, many observers think we are in a post-truth world. And of course, the 3rd T, which I think, frankly, as we talk about the future of human labor in a world of AI, is the most essential, and that is trust. We know that people have declining trust in their institutions, in government, in many different professions, in the media, and this is not just happening here in the United States. So as we operate in a vacuum of trust, trust is going to be essential as part of the kind of human recipe for how we deliver service in the future. Talk about human talent and trust. Trust is at a greater premium than ever before. It now forms the entire basis for authority and relationships between 2 people or 2 parties. Trust is a barrier to exit. Barrier to entry is a term we hear all over the place, all the time. Everyone knows barrier to entry. Barrier to exit is a way that you can build a wall that is so impenetrable that no one wants to leave that relationship. They will never take their business somewhere else because you have developed so much trust between them that they can't go elsewhere. This is the greatest barrier to exit for a business. There is going to be increased scrutiny on authenticity. Ethics will underpin everything. And the questions then become, how does the enterprise define and articulate trust? It seems like a squishy concept. So how do we define and articulate that? How do we embed it into our DNA at the enterprise level? This is going to be the golden question. How do we create those trustworthy human-to-human touch points in the future? And I know that during the course of these last couple of days, we've talked about humans in the loop. Not only are they going to remain in the loop, but they will remain essential. And we're going to talk more about that as it relates to technology in just a moment. One other area within trust I wanted to cover with you was something called the intergenerational cauldron. And all of you in this room should be at least somewhat familiar with this idea. It is the fact that for the first time in history, we have members of 5 generations working side by side with each other, the bulk of which are boomers, Gen X, my generation, which no one ever talks about. It's like we fell into a vortex, and no one really ever cares about us. Millennials, and there are many Gen Xers in the room, I know that, and millennials, and now Gen Y, increasingly. Gen Z, increasingly. 5 generations of people working together and are part of the consumer marketplace. So there is increasing tension between the generations over values, including social and environmental values, and how technology is used to be productive. And any of you who run a business with members of multiple generations understand how difficult it is to navigate this. This is all about trust between the generations and between people. How do we build trust between different team members? How do we build trust between service providers and customers? How can we optimize the high potential and tech savvy of our youngest talent while simultaneously leveraging the experience and institutional knowledge of our most senior talent? And the latter is very important. And it is a shame to see so many businesses and industries today throwing away institutional knowledge for the new shiny toy, when it should not be either or. It can be both. The intergenerational cauldron. Now, I want to spend a few minutes with you talking about what was embedded into the title of my presentation today, what I know you've heard a lot about over the last couple of days, and what I know many of you want to hear more about. And those are technological change forces, specifically artificial intelligence. So let's talk about the 4th T. How is technology deployed to optimize the 3 T's I just covered with you? Well, let's think about it from the following perspectives. We can talk about ethical AI implementation, which would be about optimizing time and trust. It would be about the transparent and not opaque utilization of technology, which we can then convey as a value of truth. Leveraging technology to accommodate different expectations of speed, which of course helps us create time efficiencies. And then leveraging technology to accommodate different methods of transacting, which hits the values of both time and trust. We talked about the accelerator effect of the last 4 years. This is where it applies the most. Outside of distributed work, we've been talking to people about artificial intelligence for 2 decades. But it's only in the last couple of years that everyone in every room I am in front of is thinking about and talking about artificial intelligence. There is so much activity in this space. And this is a visual that kind of encapsulates, in a very simplified way, if we think about nesting dolls, where this technology is going. Artificial intelligence is the catch-all, and within that is the concept of machine learning. Within machine learning is what are called neural networks, which is basically the way that technologists are trying to develop artificial intelligence to think and behave like humans would, to in effect replicate the operating system of the human brain. And then within that is the concept of deep learning, which is where we're trying to go now, which oversimplified is the idea that technology can start to learn on its own, irrespective of the programming it's been given. And that's sort of on the horizon. That's what some technologists claim they've already done. I'm not as bullish as they are in terms of some of those claims, but it is where we are trying to go, what we are trying to achieve. There is tremendous hype, investment, and potential around AI right now. And AI effectively are computational tools for tasks that traditionally required humans. And I'm going to tell you that I am somewhere in the middle of the hype cycle. You're going to hear a lot of hype that I personally do not buy into, and I am not here to deliver a message to you today that AI is going to be a panacea for all of the issues we face as businesses. In fact, I'm here to deliver quite to the contrary, a very different message than that. The primary goals right now of people working on AI are to achieve generative AI, which is what we're going to talk a little bit more about today, which is artificial intelligence, which is used to create new outputs, new or creative outputs. And then the ultimate goal is what's called AGI, and this can get confusing, artificial general intelligence, which is sort of the concept that AI will be as capable and intelligent, if not more so, than humans. Some of the fellow nerds in this room, like myself, might have heard of the term the singularity, which gets thrown around in futurist circles a lot. The singularity is a theoretical time when AI or computational ability will exceed that of humans. Some people think we're about to approach it. I don't think we're quite there yet. I will discuss why in a minute. The question is AI truly intelligent? That's an interesting question. Now, I do believe that AI's eventual killer apps, the most important areas for AI, are going to be less in the consumer applications that everyone is talking about today. I think it's going to be more in areas of exploration and discovery. It's going to be in pouring through so much data more efficiently than ever before at such greater volume that in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see the discovery of new materials that we could have never conceived of before, cures to diseases, including possibly certain types of cancers that we never could have conceived of before. That's where I see the greatest application of this technology in the next decade. We talked about the rise of generative AI. Large language models, a term which many of you have heard, are the operating system of AI today. They sift through a tremendous amount of existing information and language to create new outputs. This is an area right now with extreme experimentation, learning, and iteration, and for better or worse, it is happening on the backs of all of us. This technology is being pushed out because where are the incentives? They're in making money. So a lot of people who are trying to make money in this sector, they're investing tremendous amounts of money in tools that are getting pushed out to us, and we are effectively in the middle of an experiment. The challenges here include copyright and IP infringement, the fact that there's a lot of information out there that people did not necessarily want to have utilized as part of artificial intelligence models. Algorithmic biases, something I've been talking about with regard to technology for many, many years, which is the idea that the group of people who program these technologies and develop them are a fairly homogeneous group. They definitely do not look like this room. And when you have developers who might have certain biases, even if they're not consciously baked into the technology, they're there, and that affects the way that they operate in the future. And then this is an interesting one, self-consuming generative models. There are now generative artificial intelligence models out there that are using information generated by other artificial intelligence models, which means if the quality of the input was good, the quality of the output should be good. But if it's garbage in, it's garbage out. And because of how opaque these systems are, we don't always know because we can't always get a look under the hood. So I love this little comic. Have you figured out how AI will impact our business? And he says, I'm working on it by consulting with AI. And this is what we want to try to avoid. We want to try to avoid this technology making people dumber. We want it to make people smarter. We think about the future of AI and work. Now, this is a statistic from 2020, right around the beginning of the pandemic, and I actually think that both of these numbers are too low. But this is from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs report from 2020. And they postulated then that the rise of AI would eliminate 85 million jobs globally and create 97 million new ones by 2025. Two things. First of all, again, as I said, I think both of those numbers are too low. But secondly, the main point of this is that, yes, many jobs are going to be eliminated, just as they are at every economic and technological transformation point. But many new jobs and careers will be invented, some of which we can't even imagine of. Everyone's heard now, or hopefully many of you have heard of what a prompt engineer is. I'm going to talk about it more in a second. Prompt engineering didn't really exist in the mainstream more than 6 months or 12 months ago, and now everyone's talking about employing prompt engineers to do a better job of asking the right questions of artificial intelligence. 91% of leading businesses are currently investing in AI on a regular basis. And I guarantee you that not all 91% of those businesses know what they're doing. But they think they have to invest in AI, so they already are dipping a toe into the water when it comes to doing this. Now, here's the point. This will give away my generation in a second. Here's the point. AI is not the end of work. It has the promise of being the end of work that we don't like or work that sucks. And so if we did office space again today, Milton probably wouldn't have a job because AI would take a lot of that away. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. So let's talk about being human in an age of AI. We will still remain very reliant upon human input. The questions that we put in, that we ask artificial intelligence, are fundamental. So I mentioned prompt engineers. That is a massively growing sector of labor right now. The question is, will this technology improve enough in the next few years that we won't need prompt engineers in 3 or 5 years? Is this just a blip? Some people think yes, I'm not so sure. We are still going to be reliant upon human analysis, evaluation, and extrapolation. There are many characteristics that humans possess that this technology cannot replicate, like empathy, sense-making, and lived experience. Remember, we talked about the intergenerational cauldron. Institutional knowledge, and decades of it, are irreplaceable by technology. So here's the key point, and for those of you that were in my workshop before, you heard me talk about this. This is a massive differentiation. I actually think that artificial intelligence is a misnomer in and of itself, because I don't see it as artificial intelligence at all, at least not today. I see it as artificial smart, and I will draw that distinction in a second. I actually think that this technology is already as smart, if not smarter, than most, if not all people. But it is nowhere near as intelligent as people. Smart is the ability to learn something, to be taught something, or to be programmed something, and then do it the way you were taught or programmed to do, well or better in the future. And because these are algorithmically driven, these technologies are incredibly smart. But I don't see them as intelligent yet. And you will have some people in my space who will come in front of you and say that this is basically an intelligent technology because it is already exceeding the capacities of humanity, and I do not believe that. Intelligence is the ability to see a problem for the first time or be asked a question for the first time and come up with a solution that you have never been trained to come up with a solution for, to be innovative and to think on the fly. And so it's about anticipating problems and solutions versus reacting to data. And I'm speaking to all of you in this room today when I say, when you think about the businesses you are part of, the teams you run, the businesses you run, this is going to be one of the key hacks and values of human labor in the future. How can your people be anticipatory and solve things that the customer or client hasn't even thought of versus just being prompted into a system that technology can spit out? So the moral of the story here is that AI is leading to IA. Artificial intelligence is leading to what we call intelligence augmentation, human intelligence augmentation. Humans not just in the loop, but as central to the equation. Humans and machines working together, or what we call the dawn of the neo-humanic workforce, another word that we coined because it explains what we're getting at here. We'll be able to perform tasks faster, more accurately, and at greater scale, working together in a symbiotic way. We can focus on solving complex or nuanced issues that do need human insight. And ultimately, we need to weigh ethical considerations, for example, the integrity and quality of the data inputs that are coming through our AI systems, and how transparent we are being with our own people and with our customers about how we're using that technology. So let's talk for a couple minutes about forward momentum. Remember, I opened with imperative number one for the future, for seizing the future and being successful, and that was achieving escape velocity. Well, imperative number two is future-proofing human talent in a time of intelligence augmentation and the 3 T's, which I mentioned earlier. If we want human talent to be more than interchangeable commodities in the future, then it will need to be a hybrid of the following 3 things. Number one, a traditional service provider. In other words, they will have to be able to do the job they were hired to do. That has not fundamentally changed. Number two, they will have to be technologists. Through the integration and knowledge of emerging technologies and the ability to seamlessly work across multiple technology platforms. AI just being one technology. It could be the metaverse. It could be new forms of transacting. There are lots of examples. Much of this falls on the enterprise. The business has to give its people the tools to operate in this environment, but the people have to view themselves as technologists. In my luncheon workshop today, I talked about a key distinction historically between HR and IT. And in most businesses to this day, there is still clear delineation between the two. But in the future, the best people will not be able to get their work done without the best technology. And the best technology will not be deployable without the best people. So if those two functions are not speaking together all the time and possibly not even integrated, which they probably should be, then you're not going to win in the future. The third here is the secret sauce. This is the squishiest one, but it is the secret sauce and the one that is going to, in many ways, be the most important. How can someone be a customer or client whisperer? Through the cultivation of, remember, a trusting relationship. The ability to anticipate a customer or client's needs, save them time and effort, and the ability to assuage their concerns during highly uncertain economic times. All of that turbulence I opened up my remarks with today. Reinforcing the value of the human-to-human touch point. Remember, not just human in the loop, but humans at the center. That's going to be so valuable. Finally, this is an exciting time for innovation. The urgency of the last few years has unlocked ingenuity like we have never seen before. You see it across the board. This is Templosion in action. What may have once taken years of R&D, strategizing, and bureaucratic obstacles and planning is now being done in months. Remember, when we first entered the pandemic in 2020 and even into 2021 and 2022, there were companies that had to solve business problems overnight, and they were used to doing them in years. So this is Templosion in action, and this allows us to achieve imperative number 1, which is escape velocity. The more quickly and efficiently you can do these things and you can reimagine and innovate, the more you can achieve imperative number 1. So this is imperative number 3, which is reimagination. How do we move beyond linear innovation? In other words, the next version of what we're already doing, which is the way that most people and businesses still innovate. That is not true innovation. And reimagine the future of IA, intelligence augmentation, in this context, within our enterprises and without constraint. We can always put up obstacles. We can always say that leadership doesn't want us to do something. We can always say there's a reason not to do something. But if we reimagine the future of our business and industry in terms of what we want it to be and where we want it to go and how we want to create this intelligence augmentation, then it at least moves the goalpost and it changes the paradigm. So this is imperative number 3. Number 1, escape velocity. Number 2, future-proof your human workforce. And number 3, the value of reimagination. I've always ended with this quote. It's funny because as a futurist, I end with a quote from someone who lived a long time ago, but sometimes you look back at what people said or history to reinforce your notions of the future. And Albert Einstein said that logic will get you from A to B, imagination will get you everywhere. So I want to close by just saying the following. I know that over the last couple of days, you've all heard many great things from many different people, much of which was probably very specific to your industry. But the message I leave you with today is one that is industry independent. This applies across the board. We are living in very, very uncertain and turbulent times, but the opportunities are amazing. And I'm very optimistic and excited by them, and I think all of you should be too. So hopefully if we have this conversation again in a couple of years, it'll be a very different one from the one we're having today. So I wish you all the best of luck. I believe we have a few minutes for questions. Let me get confirmation on that from someone in the back. We have about 5 minutes. I'm getting the thumbs up. So we can take a couple of questions. Again, I know I'm standing between you all and alcoholic beverages. Not the most enviable position, but does anyone have a question they would like to ask? And by the way, as I say that, this is my contact information. 2 things. I am always willing to answer follow-up questions after the fact, and I always tell the event organizers that they can make my presentation available to attendees if you want more time to kind of digest some of what we talked about today. So with that being said, we have a few minutes for Q&A. Yes. Yes.
Mine's kind of 2 parts. 1, can you give me an example of a question that's poor versus one that would be created by a prompt engineer? And then in addition to that, with that being our concept, how can we learn from the data landfills that we all have in our businesses as we look towards utilizing AI and that prompt engineer thought? Like, what can we do now that will help us 3 years, 5 years from now, so we're not in the same place we are now with a bunch of data trash?
So that's a great question. That's probably the holy grail of questions right now. So I'm glad you asked it. Any question right now basically can benefit from a prompt engineer. Now, I'm not sitting here telling all of you to go hire thousands of prompt engineers, but it points to the basic fact that if these systems were truly intelligent as they're being built, then they would be able to figure out and anticipate and triangulate what it is that we're asking them and what we need without needing that much more human instruction. You want an example? An example for us as a futurist, part of our kind of recipe for what we do is that we read hundreds and hundreds of things on an ongoing basis. And sometimes what we do is we pull in the things that we think are noteworthy and we summarize them for our clients. We take those summaries and we synthesize those and we come up with several new thought pieces a year based on trends that we don't think people are tracking. I have tried in the last year with multiple LLMs, and I will not name the ones that I've used because I'm not here to influence people on which ones are good or bad. I've tried multiple just to effectively summarize and synthesize information, basic information that I've pulled in, and it does an incredibly poor job of doing that. And so I spoke to someone in my network who was an AI expert, and his response to me was, oh no, you need to put together about 3 pages of prompting to get it to do what you want it to do. But then, of course, once you do that perfectly, then it'll be set. But the idea that I would have to prompt it with 3 pages of instructions for something which I can tell any of you in this room to do in under 5 seconds is illustrative of the fact that we're still not where we need to be, or at least where they're promising this technology to go. The second question is not quite answerable right now, and that's why many times during this I talked about one of the pitfalls of the technology until developers and those who kind of work with it can solve it, is A, how transparent are the data sources going to be, and how do we validate the quality of those data sources? There is this concept, it's like a mythical creature, and again, some of you in this room who are nerds or students of history might have heard this term. It's called an Ouroboros, and it's this mythical creature that basically in an endless cycle eats its own tail. And so we've talked in our shop about the idea that if we don't fix the data integrity problem or the transparency of data input with a lot of these AIs, then we're effectively risking an Ouroboros where the data being fed in is not good and the data being output is not good, but we don't know where the issue started, and we don't know how to rectify the situation once we've kind of gone down the path. So I think in the next couple of years, that's going to be really the big question in terms of how do we increase the utility of this. And it all comes down, and I thank you again for the question, it all comes down to trust. How do we trust this technology, and how do we trust the people who are using it? That's going to be critical to be able to measure and validate. We have time for one or two more questions. Does anyone else have a question? Yes.
So kind of tracking AI, it seems like almost every sector is trying to race to develop some form of AI. And I guess my question is more on the governance side, because you mentioned ethical AI, and I don't think that everybody is racing to build necessarily ethical AI. So is there a governing body that kind of steers the ship a little bit now that we're entering that space?
That's also a great question. And again, I should have asked for your names as you asked the questions. Your name?
Christian.
Christian, thank you for that question. So there are two possible governing bodies with different levels of ineffectiveness. Number one, there are a lot of large tech founders and billionaires, many of whom are currently investing in and trying to develop this technology, that altruistically, they say, are trying to form a council where they can govern the future development of this technology. But as all of you in this room hopefully understand, when it comes to any of these technologies, it's all about the incentives. And if any of these people see an opportunity to make money, even though there are all of these questions around the technology, they are going to push forward at 110 miles an hour. So they can talk about creating an industry body that's going to oversee this. And by the way, if they were serious about that, they're the best ones to do it. They're building the technology, and they're the smartest people when it comes to what the technology can do. But I don't necessarily trust their motivations. Government is the other possible answer, and we all know, in my opinion, that government historically has been 5 to 10 years behind the technology curve. If you ever watch a congressional hearing in this country, regardless of whether you are a Democrat, Republican, or independent, it is laughable how unsophisticated all of these people are when they ask questions of a tech founder, because they don't understand. And this technology is far more sophisticated than any of the technologies that came before it. So I don't trust government to effectively regulate this. It is going to come down to consumer advocacy and hopefully some altruism among the people creating it to build in those controls that they're the only ones sophisticated enough to do. So again, we're talking about a lot today. I could spend another 3 hours with all of you, and part of me wishes that we could. But you don't want to hear me for 3 more hours, and you have very fun things coming up. So again, I just want to say at the end of an event, it's sometimes tricky because you've been through a lot of content and you've consumed a lot in the last couple of days. But I want to thank you for your attention, and it's been great to be back here. So thank you for having me down.